boys and girls, for our next lesson, we are going to learn about Japanese Notan art. And prior to learning about this Notan art, we're going to review a few things about the art elements, shape and space, along with some composition. So let's get started. So what exactly is space? Well, space is the area that's below, above, in between, or all around the main objects in an art piece. Space can be present or can be seen in a 2D artwork or a 3D artwork. Looking at this photo over here, this is actually a drawing that was done on the pavement. The artist uses the element of space, though, to create this illusion that there's actually a hole in the ground with these Lego men all set up in there. So using space, there's the illusion or the visual thought that there's actually a hole in the ground with all these little Lego men in it. It's pretty cool. It's pretty awesome. Raise your hand if you've ever seen something like this before, either in real life or just on photos. Awesome. You guys are lucky. Now, when we talk about space, there's two different ways that we can refer to it. There is positive space and there is negative space. Let's talk about positive space first. What is positive space? Well, positive space is just the shape or the form in an artwork. It's the main focus. So when we're looking at this photo over here on the side of the slide, the one side has a yellow vase and then a white background. Which one of these, the yellow vase or the white background, would be the positive space? If you said the yellow vase, then you're correct. That's the main focus of that photo, so that would be the positive space. Now, on the opposite side, there is a silhouette of the white vase and then a black background. Out of the two, the white space or the black space, which one would be the positive space? If you said the white space, then you're correct. However, this one is also tricky because it's an illusion. The illusion means that sometimes when you look at this photo, you see the white vase, making it the main focus, and sometimes you see two faces looking at each other. If you were to see the two faces first, that becomes the main focus for you, and then that becomes the positive space. So that one's almost like a trick question. Let's move on to negative space. What is negative space? Well, negative space is just the opposite of positive space. The negative space is the space that surrounds the main object. It is the empty or non-interesting space in between the main object or behind the main object, sometimes referred to just as the background. So for example, when we look at this photo over here on the side, we look at it and we see again white space and black space. However, one part of these stick out more than the others. When we look at the white spaces, what do you see? What image does your mind give you? If you said trees, correct. So when we see trees popping out at us in this white space, would that be the positive space or the negative space of this artwork? If you said the white space would be the positive space because it's the main focus, you're correct. And knowing that that's the positive space, then the black space becomes the negative space because that is the space that is surrounding the positive space. Now, I've said space a whole bunch in just this slide, so I'm sure you're confused. So let's review one more time. When looking at this artwork over on the side, the positive space is the trees, which is illustrated with white. Those are the main focus of the artwork. The black space is the space surrounding the main focus of the trees, and that is the negative space. Are you confused still? Okay, so moving forward from space to shape, we can talk about shape in two different ways. We can talk about shape in geometric or organic. What is the difference? Well, when we talk about geometric shapes are shapes that can be made with some kind of measuring device, such as a ruler or a compass. A ruler generally gives us straight edges where a compass can make curved edges. Over here on the left are some great examples of some geometric shapes, both that are 2D, like squares, rectangles, and circles, and some 3D, like cubes, spheres, and cylinders. When we talk about organic shapes, those are shapes that are usually found in nature and have wavy or curvy or irregular sides. So the side of a leaf, the shell of a snail, or even tree branches. They're generally not symmetrical, meaning when you fold them in half, they don't match up. Lastly, before we talk about Notan art, we are going to review what composition is and what it means in art. Does anyone know what composition is? Composition is just the way that you arrange paper or your items in your artwork. Sometimes composition is very filled with many different shapes and objects, and sometimes composition is very simple with lines and a few shapes. So now that we've reviewed space, positive and negative, shape, geometric and organic, and what composition is, let's put it all together and talk about Japanese Notan art. Here are some examples of it over on the right-hand side. Notan in the Japanese word just means light and dark. In Notan art, it is defined as the interaction between the positive and the negative spaces, or the light and the dark. The positive and the negative areas should complement or work well with one another. They have to coexist, or they have to be together without one dominating or taking over more than the other. So there's a good balance. A lot of times it can easily be referred to as this yin yang that many of us are already familiar with. When we talk about balance, there's a couple different ways that we can talk about it. First is symmetrical. If you look at the first picture here, this image is symmetrical because when we draw a symmetry line down the center of it and it's cut in half, both sides are the same or they match up. We can also have an asymmetrical balance, which means when we draw the symmetry line down the middle, both sides do not match up. There is a mismatch and they are not the same. Here's another great example of symmetrical balance. Here is a radiating design, meaning it's coming out from the center, and no matter where you would draw a line of symmetry, diagonally, horizontally, or vertically, you would be able to cut it so that both sides of that line would be the same on each side. Here's an example of an artwork that has asymmetrical balance, meaning that the two sides would be different when you draw a line through it. As you can see on the left-hand side here, there's a tall cypress tree, and on the other side, there's nothing with so much height, but there's a good balance kind of because one has height and one doesn't, and so it's not overbearing. But because it doesn't match up, it is still asymmetrical. For today's activity, you're going to be exploring positive and negative space. You're going to be getting 2 sheets of paper. One's going to be a half a sheet of color paper and then a long, tall, black piece of paper. You're going to take your color construction paper and along the long edge, you're going to draw half a shape. In this top example, I drew half of a heart. Notice when I drew it, I used all of the space, or I drew it largely so that it wasn't a tiny little heart on this large piece of paper. In this example below, I took my color construction paper and I drew half of a tree. Again, the scale of it is large so that I'm using up the space and not drawing something very tiny. Drawing your shapes, or your half shapes, excuse me, largely is going to help you when you have to cut them out in the next step. Once you cut out your half a shape in your color construction paper, your last step will be take these 2 pieces and glue them down on your black piece of paper. You're going to take the long rectangle, or tall rectangle piece, glue on the back and then line it up with the edges of your black paper so it fills in half of the paper. You're then going to take the piece that you cut out and flip it so it is on the other half of your black paper. When you're gluing these pieces down, you want to make sure to be really careful about aligning it right along the edge of where you kind of flipped it on this long edge of your color paper. When you do that, you're now creating a whole shape. In this example, it would be a whole heart. In the bottom example, it would be a whole tree. Doing so, you've now created some positive space and some negative space. In the top example, your positive space would be the heart because the heart is the main focus. On one side of your artwork, the positive space of the heart is black, and on the opposite side, the positive space of your heart is purple. You also have some negative space, which is the space that is surrounding your heart. And on one side, your negative space is purple, and on one side, your negative space is black. The same thing applies when you come down to your tree. Your tree is the main focus of this artwork. It is both black and green. Along with that, you also have created your negative space in the background around the tree. You have some negative space that is green and some negative space that is black. Once you have finished this activity, your next part is to take it a bit further and do what is called a double cut. You're going to take your other piece of color construction paper and you can draw the same shape that you've drawn before, or you could draw something different. So just taking the same shape of the heart, I'm going to draw my heart again on this half sheet of paper, and then I'm going to cut it out just like I did in the previous activity. Except now for my double cut, I'm going to take this half of a heart that I've cut out and I'm going to draw another half a heart on it right over here. After I've drawn my half a heart on this piece, I'm going to cut it out again. Once you've done that, you'll have 3 pieces of color construction paper. The leftover of the tall, long rectangle, the first half a shape that you cut out, and then the smaller second half that you have cut out. Your last step is to glue them all down together. The first piece that you're going to want to glue down is your tall rectangular piece of color construction paper. Again, you're going to line it up with the black edges so that they all fit in, and half of your paper is black and half of your paper is your leftover color construction paper. The next piece that you're going to want to glue down is your first big half a shape. And just like the first activity, you're going to glue it on the black side to make your first big initial heart. The last step you're going to do is to take your second cut of your shape and glue it down. So now it is on the purple side of your project. And once you have done that, you will have created 2 hearts. One being the larger one from your first cut, and then the second being a smaller heart from your second cut. Once you finish this extension of the first activity, you will have completed 2 positive and negative space projects. Congratulations.